I remember the exact moment my life shattered into pieces I never thought could be put back together. The rain in Portland doesn't fall gently. It drives down like cold needles, finding every gap in your clothing, every crack in your spirit. That November evening, I pressed my body against the brick wall of a closed hardware store on Burnside Street, trying to create a shelter for my 6-year-old son with nothing but my own flesh and bone. Theo was shivering against my chest, and his small fingers clutched the fabric of my coat, and I could feel the heat radiating from his forehead. The fever had returned. 3 days now, and I had nothing left to give him except the warmth of my body and promises I wasn't sure I could keep. We had been living on the streets for 67 days. I know the exact number because I counted every single one. When you lose everything, you start measuring time differently. Not in weeks or months, but in meals missed, in shelters turned away from, in the number of times your child asks why we can't go home. 67 days since the eviction notice. 67 days since our landlord changed the locks while I was at the hospital with Theo. 67 days since I walked out of Portland General with my son in my arms and nowhere to go. The first week was the hardest. I kept thinking someone would help us, that there was a system in place for situations like ours. But the shelters were full. The waiting list stretched into months. The social workers were kind but overwhelmed, their eyes already moving past us to the next desperate face in line. I learned things about survival that no mother should have to know. Which doorways offered the most protection from the wind? Which restaurants threw away food at exactly 9 o'clock, still warm in the dumpster? Which parks had bathrooms that stayed unlocked past midnight? Which corners of the city were safe for a woman alone with a child? And which ones would swallow you whole? Theo never complained. That was the part that broke me most. He was 6 years old, sleeping on cardboard, eating cold meals from food banks, wearing the same clothes for days at a time. And he never once asked me why this was happening to us. He just held my hand and told me he loved me. Some nights after he fell asleep, I would stare at the stars through the gaps in whatever shelter we had found and wonder what I had done to deserve this. I had worked hard my whole life. I had followed the rules. I had done everything right. But the universe doesn't care about right. It only cares about what is. Let me take you back to where it really started, so you understand how a woman with a job and an apartment and a future ended up huddled under a hardware store awning with $38 to her name. 14 months before that rainy night, I was a different woman. I was Rosalind Kavanaugh, rose to everyone who knew me. Now I was a shift supervisor at a logistics company downtown, making $42,000 a year. Not wealthy, but comfortable. I had a 2-bedroom apartment on the 3rd floor of a building with a view of the Willamette River. Theo had his own room with dinosaur sheets and glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling. We had a routine, we had stability, we had hope. I was doing it. Single mother, no family, no safety net, and I was doing it. My mother had died when I was 23, just 6 months after Theo was born. She never told me much about our family history, just that we had come from somewhere in the Appalachian Mountains, that her own mother was still alive but they hadn't spoken in years, and that some wounds were too deep to heal. I accepted this without question. Everyone's family has its secrets. Then the layoffs came. The company called it restructuring. 230 people lost their jobs in a single afternoon. I called into conference rooms in groups of 20, handed manila envelopes with their severance paperwork already filled out. I walked out of that building with a cardboard box containing a coffee mug, a photograph of Theo, and the shattered remains of my carefully constructed life. But I told myself it would be fine. I had savings. I had skills. I would find something else. 3 weeks later, Theo collapsed at his kindergarten. I was in the middle of a job interview when my phone rang. And the school nurse's voice was calm but urgent. "Your son is having trouble breathing. We've called an ambulance." The next hours exist in my memory as a series of frozen images. Theo's small body on a hospital gurney, tubes snaking into his arms. The beeping of machines I didn't understand. Doctors speaking in calm, measured tones about severe pneumonia and underlying respiratory conditions, and the importance of remaining positive. He spent 18 days in the pediatric intensive care unit. I sat beside his bed every single hour, watching the machines breathe for him, bargaining with God, with the universe, with anyone who might be listening. I would give anything. Take anything from me. Just let me keep my son. He survived. That was the miracle. The bill was $52,000. That was the curse. My savings vanished in the first week of hospital stay. The second week, I maxed out every credit card I had. By the time Theo was discharged, I was borrowing from co-workers at the temp job I'd managed to find between hospital visits. The rent went unpaid. Then again. Then a third time. Mr. Hendricks, my landlord, was not a patient man. He posted the eviction notice on a Tuesday morning while I was at the pharmacy picking up Theo's medications. By Thursday afternoon, the locks were changed. My belongings were in trash bags on the curb. Aaron, the building manager, told me I had 20 minutes to take what I could carry before he called the police. I grabbed Theo's medication, his favorite stuffed elephant, a ragged thing named Gerald that he'd had since he was a baby. A single photograph of my mother holding me as an infant, and we walked away from everything else. The shelters were always full. The waiting list stretched into months. We applied for emergency housing, for assistance programs, or for anything that might give us a roof over our heads. But the system was overwhelmed, and we were just two more faces in a sea of desperate people. I found day labor when I could, warehouse work, cleaning offices, anything that paid cash at the end of the shift. But it was never enough, and I couldn't leave Theo alone, which meant I couldn't work the longer jobs, the better paying jobs, the jobs that might have pulled us out of the pit we were sinking into. Every day was a battle. Every night was a prayer. And every morning I woke up amazed that we had survived another 24 hours. That evening in the rain, I had $38 in my pocket. Everything I owned in the world fit in a single backpack. My son was burning with fever, and I was beginning to wonder if survival was even possible anymore. At 6 o'clock, the heavy metal doors of the St. Francis Women's Shelter finally ground open. The line of desperate women surged forward, and everyone moving with the same exhausted urgency. I lifted Theo onto my hip, ignoring the screaming pain in my lower back, and shuffled inside, into the blessed warmth of the gymnasium. The smell hit me first. Bodies and disinfectant and the lingering ghost of 1,000 dinners served on plastic trays. But it was warm. God, it was warm. Dorothy Winslow was working the front desk. She was a tired woman in her 60s with kind eyes, gray hair pulled back in a practical bun. It's in the sort of patience that comes from years of witnessing human suffering without letting it harden your heart. I had seen her nearly every night for 2 months. She knew my name, knew Theo's name, knew our story without me ever having to tell it. She looked up as I approached, and something in her expression shifted. There was a light in her eyes I hadn't seen before. "Rose," she said softly, "I've been looking for you." I set Theo down on a nearby chair, wrapping him in our single blanket, and the wool was thin and threadbare, but it was the warmest thing we owned. "Looking for me? Why?" Dorothy reached under the counter and pulled out a manila envelope, wrinkled and water-stained from its journey through the postal system. The paper was thick, expensive-looking, completely out of place in this room full of desperate women and crying children. "This came 3 days ago," she said. "Forwarded from your old address. I've been holding it for you." I stared at the envelope. The return address read, Pendleton and Associates, Attorneys at Law, Briar Hollow, West Virginia. West Virginia. The word echoed in my mind like a bell. The only person I had ever known in West Virginia was a ghost. A woman from photographs and half-remembered childhood dreams. My grandmother, Loretta Mae Ashford, whom I had last seen when I was 8 years old, standing on a gravel driveway, crying as my mother drove us away without looking back. 24 years of silence, and now this. "Drawing, it doesn't look like a bill," Dorothy said gently. "I thought it might be important." My fingers trembled as I tore open the envelope. A thick stack of legal documents slid out, along with a single sheet of ivory paper covered in elegant typewriting. "Dear Ms. Kavanaugh, it is with regret that I inform you of the passing of your grandmother, Loretta Mae Ashford, on October 3rd of this year. As her sole surviving blood relative, you have been named the primary beneficiary in her last will and testament. Mrs. Ashford's estate, comprising a residential structure and 5 acres of undeveloped land situated on the northern ridge outside Briar Hollow, West Virginia, is hereby transferred to your ownership. Enclosed, please find the deed. Property keys and transfer documentation. The property is transferred as is. Please be advised that no liquid assets remain in the estate. Sincerely, Victor Thornwood, Inano Esquire. I read the words 3 times before they made sense. A house, 5 acres of land. I wasn't homeless anymore. I owned property. The sob that escaped my throat was raw and primal, something between grief and relief, and a desperate, fragile hope I was afraid to trust. 24 years without a single word from my grandmother, and now she had reached out from beyond death to save us. But there was more. Tucked behind the legal documents was a smaller envelope, but this one addressed in shaky handwriting I didn't recognize. The paper inside was thin, almost transparent with age, covered in cramped script that pressed deeply into the page. My dearest Rose, if you are reading this, I have passed from this world. I wish I could explain everything in this letter, but there isn't time, and some things must be discovered, not told. Come to Briar Hollow, come to the house on the ridge, but listen carefully to what I'm about to say. Trust no one in town, especially not the lawyer. Find the mirror in my bedroom. Behind it, you will find the truth. Everything I have belongs to you now. Everything, including secrets that powerful men have killed to possess. Protect yourself, protect your child, and know that everything I have done for you. I have always loved you, even when I couldn't show it. Your grandmother, Loretta May. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely refold the letter. Secrets? Powerful men? What kind of inheritance had my grandmother left me? I looked over at Theo, who had fallen asleep on the hard plastic chair, his cheeks still flushed with fever. Gerald the elephant clutched against his chest. Whatever waited in West Virginia, it had to be better than this. A roof over our heads, walls to keep out the cold, a chance at something that looked like a future. Dorothy was watching me with knowing eyes. She had seen this moment before, I realized. The moment when desperation meets opportunity. The moment when everything changes. I need to get to West Virginia, I said, my voice cracking on the words. Dorothy reached into her desk drawer and pulled out a small envelope. Emergency fund, she said quietly. It's not much, $200, but sometimes that's enough to change everything. I tried to protest, but she pressed the envelope into my hands with surprising strength. What, your grandmother was right about one thing, Dorothy said softly. You need to protect that boy. Whatever is waiting for you out there, go find it, and don't look back. The next morning I sold my wedding ring. It was a modest gold band, the only thing of value I had managed to keep through all the chaos. Marcus had given it to me 9 years ago, standing in front of a justice of the peace, promising forever. He lasted 3 years before he walked out, leaving me with a 2-year-old son and a note that said he wasn't ready for the responsibility of being a father. The pawn shop on Morrison Street gave me $240. The man behind the counter didn't even look at me as he counted out the bills. Just another desperate woman turning her memories into cash. He saw 100 of us every week. Combined with Dorothy's gift and my remaining $38, and I had just enough for 2 one-way Greyhound tickets and a few bags of cheap groceries from the dollar store. The journey from Portland to Briar Hollow, West Virginia, took 58 hours. 58 hours of cramped seats that smelled like cigarettes and fast food. 58 hours of crying babies and snoring strangers and rest stops that all looked exactly the same. 58 hours of watching America scroll past the grimy windows, with the landscape shifting from the green forests of Oregon to the brown plains of the Midwest to the ancient rumpled mountains of Appalachia. Theo slept against my shoulder most of the way, his fever finally breaking somewhere in the flatlands of Nebraska. I watched his face as he dreamed, memorizing every line, every curve, every tiny imperfection that made him perfect to me. This child who had not asked to be born into struggle. This child who had accepted hardship with more grace than I had ever managed. I was going to give him a better life. I swore it on that bus, watching the miles disappear behind us. Whatever it took, whatever I had to do. As the bus wound through the Appalachian Mountains on the final leg of our journey, I pressed my face against the window and watched the landscape transform. The trees here were ancient and dense, on their bare branches reaching toward a slate-gray sky like fingers, grasping for something just out of reach. The hollows between the ridges were filled with mist that seemed to have substance, weight, as if the very air was older here. The mountains themselves were nothing like the Cascades back in Oregon. These were worn down by time, rounded and weathered, their peaks lost in low-hanging clouds. There was something almost mystical about them, something that whispered of secrets buried deep in the earth. The bus dropped us at a Texaco station on the edge of town. The driver didn't announce the stop, just pulled over and nodded at me in the rearview mirror. End of the line. Briar Hollow was exactly what I had imagined from my grandmother's letter. A main street with a diner called Mabel's, a hardware store called Crowley's, a white steepled church with a sign that read, First Baptist, founded 1847. The kind of place where everyone knows everyone, where strangers are noticed immediately, where gossip travels faster than the speed of sound. The air was different here, cleaner, sharper, carrying the scent of wood smoke and decaying leaves. Everything felt slower, as if time itself moved at a different pace in these mountains. I found the law office easily enough, a modest brick building on Main Street with gold lettering on the window that read, Thornwood and Associates, attorneys at law. The building was sandwiched between a barber shop and an antique store, looking thoroughly respectable and completely unremarkable. A bell jingled as I pushed open the door, and the smell of old paper and pipe tobacco wrapped around me like a blanket. Victor Thornwood emerged from the back room within seconds, as if he had been waiting. He was tall and remarkably thin, with silver hair swept back from a high forehead and the kind of face that seemed designed for looking down at people. His suit was expensive but slightly dated, the fashion of a man who had stopped paying attention to the world outside his own domain about 20 years ago. His handshake was cold and brief, his palm dry as paper. Ms. Kavanaugh, he said, his eyes sweeping over my worn coat, my scuffed boots, the exhausted child clinging to my leg. I watched him take inventory of our poverty in a single glance. We've been expecting you. Something about the way he said it made my skin prickle. We've been expecting you, as if he had been watching, waiting. The paperwork, I said, keeping my voice steady despite the unease crawling up my spine. I need to finalize the transfer. Thornwood smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Those eyes were pale blue and cold. The eyes of a man who had learned long ago how to appear pleasant while calculating exactly what you were worth to him. Of course, though I feel obligated to warn you, the property is in considerable disrepair. Your grandmother was eccentric in her later years, refused to leave that mountain, refused to let anyone help her. He paused, his tongue running over his lower lip. Refused to listen to reason. Reason? The property isn't worth much, Ms. Kavanaugh. An old house falling apart. A land that's too steep to farm. No running water, no electricity. Your grandmother lived like a hermit up there for the last 35 years. He leaned back in his leather chair, steepling his fingers. I could take it off your hands, save you the trouble. $45,000 cash. You could start fresh somewhere warm. Give your boy there a proper home. $45,000. A year ago, it would have seemed like a fortune. Now, standing in this cold office with my grandmother's warning echoing in my mind, it felt like a trap. Trust no one in town, especially not the lawyer. I think I'll see the property first, I said. Something flickered in Thornwood's eyes. Just for a moment, something cold and dangerous broke through the pleasant facade. Then it was gone, replaced by that same smooth smile. Suit yourself. He reached into his desk and withdrew a heavy iron key, dropping it onto the polished wood with a deliberate clang. The key was old, black with age, the kind that belonged to a door that had been locked for a very long time. The trail to the house starts at the end of Miller's Road, about 4 miles outside of town. It's a 3-mile hike up the ridge from there. The path washes out after heavy rain. He slid a hand-drawn map across the desk, his fingers lingering on the paper for just a moment too long. Good luck, Ms. Kavanaugh. You'll need it. If you've been following my story this far, I need to pause and ask you something. Have you ever received news that completely changed the direction of your life? A letter? A phone call? Something that came out of nowhere and turned everything upside down? I want to hear your story in the comments below. And please, if this story is touching your heart, take a moment to subscribe, because what I found on that mountain changed everything I thought I knew about my family, about myself, about what it means to fight for the people you love. I hired a teenager with a pickup truck to drive us to the end of Miller's Road. His name was Jake, and he couldn't have been more than 17, with a mop of brown hair and eyes that kept sliding to the rearview mirror to look at us. "You're going up to the Ashford place?" he asked as we bounced along the rutted dirt road. "That's right. Nobody's been up there in months, not since the old lady passed." He hesitated. "Gee, folks in town say she was crazy, kept to herself, wouldn't let anyone near the property. Shot at a surveyor once, back in '09. "Shot at him?" Jake shrugged. "Missed on purpose is what I heard. But still, sent a message, you know?" The road ended at a rusted gate, half hidden by overgrown brush. Beyond it, a narrow trail disappeared into the forest like a tunnel into another world. "This is as far as I go," Jake said, pulling to a stop. "That trail goes straight up the ridge. 3 miles, maybe a little more. Watch your step. The rocks get slippery." I paid him his $10 and lifted Theo out of the truck bed. The boy was awake now, his eyes wide as he stared at the wall of trees before us. "Are we going in there, Mommy?" "We are, baby. Our new home is at the top." The hike nearly broke me. The trail was more of a suggestion than an actual path, a muddy track that wound steeply through dense forest. Ancient oaks and hemlocks pressed in on all sides, their branches intertwining overhead to form a canopy that blocked out most of the gray winter light. The ground was slick with wet leaves and hidden rocks that seemed designed to twist ankles and break spirits. I carried Theo on my back for the first mile, his arms wrapped around my neck, his breath warm against my ear. My legs screamed with every step. My lungs burned. The backpack full of our meager possessions felt like it weighed 100 pounds. When I couldn't carry him anymore, I set him down, and we climbed together hand in hand, stopping every few minutes to catch our breath. Theo didn't complain. He just held my hand tighter and kept putting one foot in front of the other. The higher we went, the colder it became. The fog that had been lingering in the hollows below began to rise, swallowing the trees around us until we were walking through a gray void, able to see only a few feet in any direction. The silence was absolute. No birds, no wind. Just the sound of our own labored breathing and the crunch of leaves beneath our boots. After nearly 3 hours, we emerged into a small clearing, and I got my first look at my inheritance. The house was a disaster. It was a 2-story wooden structure that looked as though it had been fighting a losing battle with the forest for decades. The white paint was peeling in long strips, revealing gray, weathered wood beneath. The porch roof sagged dramatically on one side, supported by a pillar that had rotted halfway through. Dark green moss covered the shingles, and thick vines had climbed the stone chimney, wrapping around it like the fingers of a giant trying to drag the whole building back into the earth. Several windows were boarded with splintered plywood. Others gaped empty, their glass long since shattered by time or weather or something else entirely. The yard, if you could call it that, was choked with what appeared to be junk. Rusted car parts, broken furniture, towers of wooden crates, coils of wire and rope. It looked like a junkyard had exploded across the property. "Is this it, Mommy?" Theo's voice was small and uncertain. "It looks scary." I swallowed the lump of despair in my throat. I had traveled 2,000 miles for this, spent every dollar I had, burned every bridge, and this was what awaited us. But then I looked closer, past the peeling paint and the sagging porch and the chaos of the yard. The foundation was solid stone, set deep into the mountainside. The main timbers of the house, visible through the gaps in the siding, were massive and straight, showing no signs of rot. The chimney beneath the vines was built of fitted fieldstone that had stood for over a century. The bones were good. The house just needed someone to believe in it. "It just needs some love," I said, forcing brightness into my voice. "A little cleaning, some repairs. We'll make it beautiful, I promise." I walked up the groaning porch steps, already testing each one before putting my full weight on it. The boards protested but held. The front door was solid oak, thick and weathered, with iron hinges that had turned black with age. The key slid into the lock with surprising ease, and the door swung inward with a shriek of rusted hinges. The smell hit me first, dust and mildew and something herbal, like dried sage or lavender, layered over the musty scent of a house that had been closed up for months. The interior was dim, the only light filtering through grimy windows, casting everything in shades of gray and brown. And then I saw what my grandmother had left behind. The house was packed with stuff. Stacks of newspapers reached the ceiling in some places, yellow and brittle with age. Boxes of glass jars and metal containers covered every surface. There were tools of all kinds, farm equipment, machine parts, things I couldn't identify. Narrow paths wound through the clutter like trails through a maze, and while the only clear spaces in rooms otherwise filled to bursting. But as my eyes adjusted to the dim light, I began to see the method within the madness. The newspapers weren't random. They were organized by date, bound with twine. The tools weren't scattered. They were grouped by function, hanging from hooks on the walls. The jars contained preserved food, seeds, dried herbs. This wasn't the chaos of mental illness. This was the organized stockpile of someone preparing for a siege. I guided Theo to a relatively clear spot near the massive stone fireplace that dominated the main room. Using dry kindling I found stacked in a corner, I managed to get a small fire going. The flames cast dancing shadows across the cluttered room, transforming it into something almost magical. "It's warmer now," Theo said, curling up on a faded quilt I had spread on the floor. "I like the fire." "Me too, baby. Get some sleep." Within minutes, he was breathing deeply. Gerald the elephant tucked under his chin, exhaustion finally winning its battle with curiosity and fear. I watched him for a long moment, this precious child who had endured so much without complaint. Then I picked up my flashlight and began to explore. The kitchen was a disaster, coated in grease and dust that had solidified into a kind of armor over every surface. The cast iron stove looked like it hadn't been used in years, but the pantry was stocked with canned goods, in bags of rice and beans, enough to keep us fed for weeks if necessary. The second floor held 2 bedrooms and what had once been a bathroom, though the plumbing had clearly failed long ago. The smaller bedroom was empty except for a rusted bed frame. The larger one, the master bedroom, was as cluttered as the rest of the house. I was making my way back toward the stairs when I felt something strange beneath my boot. A different kind of creak. Not the groan of settling wood, but something mechanical. A click. I stopped, holding my breath. I stepped back, then forward again, placing my foot in the exact same spot. Click. I knelt down, running my fingers along the edges of the floorboard. Unlike the others, which were nailed flush to the joists, this one had a faint seam around it, almost invisible in the dim light. My heart began to pound as I pried at the edges with my fingernails. The board resisted at first, then popped up with a soft snap, revealing a dark cavity beneath. Inside was a wooden box bound in brass straps. I lifted it out with trembling hands. It was surprisingly heavy, the wood dark with age, the brass tarnished but still strong. There was no lock, just a simple latch. I carried it back to the firelight, my fingers shaking. I opened the lid. The first thing I saw was a gun, a Colt 1911, polished and well-maintained, with a loaded magazine beside it. My ex-husband had insisted I learn to shoot during his brief survivalist phase, so I recognized the model immediately. This was a serious weapon, heavy and powerful, and it had been hidden beneath my grandmother's floor. Beneath the gun was a thick, leather-bound journal, its cover worn soft with age, strange symbols embossed into the leather. The pages were filled with cramped handwriting, some entries neat and careful, others scrawled in what looked like desperate haste. And at the very bottom of the box was a photograph. I picked it up, and my breath caught in my throat. It was my grandmother, much younger than I remembered, standing on the porch of this very house. The paint was fresh, the porch straight and strong, the yard neat and tended. In her arms was a small child with blonde hair and wide, curious eyes. Me. It was me. I turned the photograph over. On the back, in my grandmother's handwriting, were the words, "My beautiful Rose, age 4. One day you will understand why I had to let you go. Know that I never stopped loving you. Know that everything I have done for you." The tears came then, silent and hot, streaming down my cheeks as I held this proof of a love I had spent 24 years believing didn't exist. My mother had told me the family was broken beyond repair, that my grandmother was unstable, dangerous even, that we were better off without her. I had believed it because I was a child. Why? And children believe what their mothers tell them. But here was evidence of a different truth. A woman who had held me in her arms, who had prepared for my eventual return, who had hidden a gun and a journal and a photograph in her floor, waiting for the day when I would come looking for answers. I opened the journal to the first page. The handwriting was cramped and urgent, the words pressed deep into the paper. September 14th, 1987. I found something today, something that will change everything. I was digging a new well on the north side of the property, about 70 feet down, when my shovel struck something that wasn't dirt or rock. At first I thought it was a vein of quartz, but it's not. It's something else entirely. I've sent a sample to Dr. Harrison at the university. I won't know what it is until he gets back to me. I have a feeling, though, a feeling that my life is about to change. I flip forward through the pages, scanning entries that spanned decades, where the handwriting changed over time, growing shakier as the years passed, but the content grew more urgent. October 3rd, 1987. Dr. Harrison called today. His voice was shaking. He asked me 3 times if I was sure about where the sample came from. It's lithium, Rose. High-grade, easily extractable lithium, the kind they use in batteries and electronics. He says the vein could be worth a fortune. Tens of millions, maybe more. I told him not to tell anyone. Something in my gut tells me this knowledge is dangerous. November 15th, 1987. I was right to be afraid. Strangers have started coming to Briar Hollow, men in expensive suits, asking questions about property values. A mining company called Titan Resources has been buying up land all around the county. They don't know about my vein. Not yet, but they're looking. March 3rd, 1988, Victor Thornwood came to my door today. He's a lawyer from town, represents Titan Resources. He offered me $50,000 for the whole property. When I refused, he smiled and said I would change my mind. There was something in his eyes that frightened me, something cold and patient, like a snake waiting for a mouse to make a mistake. I won't make a mistake. The entries grew darker from there. Cut phone lines, livestock found dead without explanation, strange lights in the woods at night. My grandmother documented everything with the precision of a woman who knew she might need evidence someday. And then I found the entry that stopped my heart. April 17th, 2000. They know about Rose. Thornwood came today with Sheriff Harlan's father, old Earl Harlan, who's been in Titan's pocket for 30 years. They didn't threaten me directly. That's not how they work. Instead, they talked about my granddaughter. 8 years old, they said. Lives in Portland with her mother. Goes to Westbrook Elementary School. Walks home alone most days, doesn't she? Such a pretty little girl. So trusting. They didn't have to say anything else. I understand now. I understand what I have to do. The next entry was dated 2 weeks later, May 1st, 2000. It's done. I called Catherine last night. Told her she had to leave Portland immediately. Take Rose and disappear. Change their names if possible. Never contact me again. Never come back. She didn't understand. She thought I had lost my mind. She screamed at me, called me every terrible thing a daughter can call a mother. She said she would never forgive me for this. I let her believe I was crazy. I let her believe I didn't love her, didn't love Rose, didn't want them in my life. It was the hardest thing I have ever done. But I would rather my daughter hate me for the rest of her life than see my granddaughter hurt by these men. They will be watching me, testing me. We're looking for any sign that I'm still in contact with my family. I have to make them believe they've won, that I've been broken. I am alone now, but Rose is safe. That's all that matters. I closed the journal, unable to read another word. The tears were streaming down my face, and I pressed my hand to my mouth to keep from sobbing out loud. 24 years. 24 years of believing I was unwanted, unloved, abandoned. And the whole time, my grandmother had been standing guard over a secret worth millions, refusing to sell, refusing to break. knowing that powerful men watched her every move and would destroy anyone she loved. She had sacrificed everything to protect me. A sudden sound from outside shattered the silence. The crunch of tires on gravel, the slam of a car door. I clicked off my flashlight instantly and crept toward the window, the Colt suddenly heavy and reassuring in my hand. Through a crack in the boards, I saw a truck parked at the edge of the clearing, its headlights cutting through the fog like searchlights. A man climbed out, big, broad shoulders, thick arms, a gun belt riding low on his hips. A wide-brimmed hat shadowed his face, but I could see the glint of a silver star pinned to his chest. Sheriff. He walked toward the porch, his heavy boots crunching on the frozen ground, taking his time, making sure I could hear him coming. Hello? His voice was deep and slow, her carrying the lazy drawl of someone who had never been in a hurry in his life. Anyone home? It's Sheriff Harlan. Just doing a wellness check. Harlan, the same name from the journal, the son of the man who had threatened me when I was 8 years old. Trust no one in town, especially not the lawyer. My grandmother hadn't mentioned the sheriff, but she didn't have to. The pieces were falling into place with terrible clarity. Sheriff Harlan climbed the porch steps, the wood groaning under his weight. He pressed his face against the dirty glass of the front door, shining a flashlight inside. The beam swept across the cluttered room, passing within inches of where Theo lay sleeping. I held my breath. My finger rested on the trigger of the Colt, ready. I know someone's in there, he called. Saw smoke from the chimney? Just want to make sure you're settling in okay. Welcome you to Briar Hollow. He paused, and I could hear him breathing on the other side of the door. Don't be like your grandmother, ma'am. She made things difficult for herself. Didn't have to be that way. He tapped the window frame with one thick finger. We'll talk soon. Get some rest. He turned and walked back to his truck, taking his time, making sure I knew he could come back whenever he pleased. The engine roared to life, and the headlights retreated down the mountain, swallowed by the fog. I sat in the darkness, my heart pounding, my grandmother's gun heavy in my lap. Whatever secret this mountain held, powerful men were willing to kill for it, and I had just announced my presence to all of them. I didn't sleep that night. I sat with my back against the wall, the Colt within reach, watching the fire die down to embers and listening to every sound the old house made. Every creak of settling wood, every whisper of wind through the gaps in the walls, every distant call of an owl in the darkness. The journal lay open in my lap, and I read by the dying firelight, page after page, year after year. My grandmother's words painted a picture of a woman under siege, a woman who had spent 35 years fighting a war that no one else could see. The lithium vein, according to her notes, ran straight through the heart of her property and extended deep into the mountain. She had hired an independent geologist in 1991, a man from out of state who had no connections to Titan Resources. His estimate put the value of the deposit at over $200 million. $200 million. No wonder they wanted her land so badly. But my grandmother had refused to sell, not because she wanted the money. The journal made it clear she had no interest in becoming wealthy. She refused because she knew what Titan Resources would do to the mountain. Strip mining, chemical processing, contaminated water and poisoned air, and a landscape scarred forever. This land has been in my family for 4 generations, she wrote in an entry dated 1995. My grandfather cleared these fields by hand. My grandmother planted the apple orchard that still grows wild on the south slope. My mother is buried on this ridge next to my father, in graves I tend every Sunday. I will not let them tear it apart for profit. I will not let them turn my family's legacy into a wasteland. I will hold this land until my last breath, and then I will pass it to Rose. And she will decide what happens next. When the first gray light of dawn crept through the windows, I felt like I had aged 10 years. Theo stirred beside me, rubbing his eyes. Morning, Mommy. Morning, sweet boy. I stroked his hair, checking his forehead automatically. The fever was completely gone. How do you feel? Hungry. Despite everything, I laughed. Me too. Let's see what we can find. The kitchen was a disaster, but the pantry was a gold mine. Canned beans, canned vegetables, dried pasta, rice, enough to keep us fed for weeks. I found a camping stove in one of the storage rooms, along with propane canisters and a set of cast iron cookware that looked older than me. We had our first hot meal in days sitting on the floor by the fireplace, eating beans and rice out of tin cups while the morning sun struggled through the grimy windows. I was washing our dishes in a bucket of water from the rain barrel outside when I heard footsteps on the porch. My hand went immediately to the Colt, still tucked in my waistband. But the knock that followed was gentle, hesitant, not the demanding rap of Sheriff Harlan. I crept to the window and peered out. Standing on the porch was an elderly woman with silver hair pinned up in a practical bun. She wore a heavy coat over a floral house dress and held a covered dish in both hands. Her face was weathered but kind, the face of someone who had spent a lifetime working outdoors and made peace with every line and wrinkle. "Hello," she called. "I don't mean to intrude. I'm Delphine Greer. I live about 2 miles down the mountain. I knew your grandmother." I opened the door a crack, keeping my body between the visitor and Theo. Delphine smiled, and it transformed her entire face, lighting it up from within. "Oh my goodness, you look just like her. Same eyes, same stubborn chin." She held out the dish. I brought you a chicken pot pie. Figured you might not have had time to stock the kitchen, and store-bought food gets old quick." The smell wafting from beneath the foil cover was incredible. Real food, home-cooked food. My stomach growled loudly enough that Delphine heard it, and her smile widened. "Why?" I asked, unable to keep the suspicion from my voice. After last night, I wasn't sure I could trust anyone in this town. "Why would you help a stranger?" Delphine's smile softened, and in something like pain flickered in her eyes. "Because your grandmother helped me, child. Back in '99, my husband Bill passed from cancer, left me with 300 acres and $80,000 of debt. The bank was going to take everything. My home, my land, my family's history going back 5 generations. She paused, swallowing hard. Loretta May paid off my mortgage, every penny. Never asked for a single thing in return. Just showed up one day with a cashier's check and a smile and told me that neighbors take care of neighbors." She pressed the dish into my hands. "I've waited 25 years to pay that debt. You're giving me the chance." I stood there holding the warm pot pie, trying to process this unexpected kindness. My grandmother had spent 35 years alone on this mountain, dismissed by the town as a crazy hermit. But she hadn't been entirely friendless. Or there were people who remembered her goodness, people who had been waiting for a chance to repay it. "There's something else," Delphine said, her voice dropping. "I need to warn you. Victor Thornwood has been sniffing around your property for years. Him and Sheriff Harlan. They've been waiting for Loretta to die so they could get their hands on this land." "I know about the lithium," I said quietly. Delphine's eyes widened. "She told you?" "She left me a journal. And a warning." The older woman nodded slowly. "Then you know what you're up against. Thornwood isn't just a lawyer, child. He's connected to people in Charleston, in Washington, powerful people with deep pockets and no conscience. They've been trying to get this land for decades, and they don't take no for an answer." She pulled a folded piece of paper from her coat pocket. "My phone number. If you need anything at all, you call me. What day or night?" She squeezed my arm with surprising strength. "Your grandmother was the bravest woman I ever knew. I see that same strength in you. Don't let them break you like they tried to break her." She turned and walked back down the porch steps, disappearing into the morning mist like a ghost. Later that afternoon, another visitor arrived. I heard the rumble of an engine long before the truck appeared, grinding its way up the mountain trail. I watched from the window, the Colt in my hand, as an ancient Ford pickup emerged from the tree line and rolled to a stop in front of the house. The man who climbed out was everything Victor Thornwood was not. Big and raw-boned, with hands like shovels and a face creased by 70 years of sun and wind. He wore faded overalls and work boots caked with mud, and he moved with the slow, deliberate gait of someone who had never wasted energy in his life. He walked up to the porch and stood there, making no move to knock, just waiting. And I opened the door. "Ma'am," he said, tipping an ancient John Deere cap. "Name's Emmett Crowley. I own the hardware store in town. Your grandmother and I went back about 50 years. What do you want?" He studied me for a long moment with pale blue eyes that missed nothing. Heard there was a young woman up here with a boy. Figured you might need help with the roof. Saw some shingles coming loose last time I drove past. Now a couple more storms and you'll have water coming in. I can't pay you, I said bluntly. Emmett shrugged. Didn't ask for pay. Your grandma was there when my Margaret passed, back in '02. Sat with her for hours while the cancer took her. Held her hand at the end when I couldn't do it anymore. Never asked for nothing. He looked up at the sagging porch roof. This old place has good bones. Just needs someone to care for it again. Loretta couldn't manage the upkeep these last few years. Too old. Well, too stubborn to ask for help, but it's not too far gone. Not yet. He worked until sunset, replacing shingles, reinforcing the rotted porch pillar, clearing debris from the rain gutters. Theo followed him around like a puppy, handing him tools and asking endless questions about the mountain, the wildlife, the way the fog rolled through the hollows at dawn. Before he left, Emmett pulled me aside. That lawyer Thornwood, he said quietly, him and Sheriff Harlan. They've had their eyes on this property for 30 years. Tried everything to get your grandmother to sell. Legal tricks, harassment, threats. She never sold. No, ma'am, she never did. He looked out at the darkening forest. There was a time, maybe 15 years back, when livestock started dying on farms that wouldn't sell to Thornwood's shell companies. Cattle would just drop dead in the fields. No one ever proved anything. Okay, but we all knew. You think they poisoned them? I think powerful men do powerful things when they want something bad enough. He climbed into his truck, then leaned out the window. Your grandma found something up here, something valuable, and I know there are men who would kill to get it. You watch yourself, Miss Kavanaugh, and you watch that boy. That night after Theo fell asleep, I made my decision. I had to see the mine, and I had to know if everything my grandmother had documented was real, or if it was the fevered imagination of a lonely woman losing her grip on reality. The map I had found behind the mirror in the bedroom showed the location clearly, a 3-mile hike up the North Ridge to an old Ford truck that concealed the entrance to the primary lithium vein. We set out at dawn, following the hand-drawn map through dense forest and up steep, rocky trails. The air was cold and sharp, and our breath formed white clouds that hung in the still air. Theo held my hand and didn't complain, even when the climbing became difficult. I carried the Colt in my waistband and a small backpack with water and snacks. We moved as quietly as we could, staying off the main trail, using the trees for cover. After nearly 2 hours, I heard something that made me freeze. A low, rhythmic thumping, a mechanical whine, the unmistakable sound of heavy machinery. I dropped to my knees, and pulling Theo down beside me behind a massive fallen oak tree. What is it, Mommy? He whispered. Shh, stay quiet, stay right here. I crawled forward on my stomach, my elbows digging into the frozen ground until I could peer over the rotting trunk. What I saw made my blood turn to ice. A natural gorge opened up about 50 yards ahead, hidden from view by the surrounding ridges until you were almost on top of it. And in that gorge, completely concealed from any road or trail, was a full-scale industrial drilling operation. 3 men in hard hats worked around a massive rig that drove a steel bit deep into the bedrock. A generator roared nearby, pumping black smoke into the crisp mountain air. Equipment and supplies were stacked around the site, tarps covering what looked like core samples and geological equipment. One of the workers was enormous, built like a professional wrestler, with a shaved head and a hunting rifle slung across his back. Even from this distance, I could see the way he moved, the coiled tension of a man who was used to violence. This wasn't a worker. This was an enforcer. As I watched, a fourth man detached a core sample from the drill and carried it to a folding table set up near the tree line. He was tall and thin, dressed not in work clothes but in an expensive overcoat that looked absurdly out of place in the wilderness. Victor Thornwood. He examined the sample, pulling out a chunk of silver-white rock, and even from 50 yards away I could see the triumphant smile spread across his face. "We've hit the main artery," he shouted over the machinery. 90% pure. This is it, gentlemen. Tucker, get the county judge on the phone. I want eminent domain papers filed by Friday. We'll have this land condemned as an environmental hazard and in our possession within 72 hours. The big man with the rifle, Tucker, nodded and pulled out a satellite phone. 72 hours. They were going to steal my grandmother's land in 72 hours, using the very legal system that was supposed to protect property owners like me. I had to get evidence, had to document this, had to find a way to stop them. I pulled out my phone and started taking pictures, zooming in on Thornwood's face, on the drilling rig, on the equipment marked with the Titan Resources logo. Behind me, I heard Theo shift, trying to get a better look at what I was seeing, and then a branch snapped. The sound was like a gunshot in the crisp morning air. Thornwood's head snapped up. His eyes scanned the tree line, and for a terrible moment, they seemed to lock directly onto our hiding spot. "Who's up there?" he shouted. "Tucker, we've got company." The big man dropped his phone and raised his rifle in one fluid motion, already moving toward the fallen tree where we were hiding. I need to pause here for just a moment. If you're still with me, if you're feeling your heart pound the way mine did that morning, I want to hear from you. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where you discovered something you weren't supposed to see? Something that put you and the people you love in danger? Share your story in the comments. And please, if you haven't already, take a second to subscribe, because what happened next is something I still have nightmares about. I didn't think. There wasn't time to think. I grabbed Theo and ran. The forest became a blur of trees and rocks and thorny brush that tore at my clothes and skin. Behind us, I could hear shouting, the crash of heavy boots through the undergrowth, Tucker's voice barking orders to the other workers. "Spread out! Cover the ridge! Don't let them reach the main road." Theo was crying, but silently, the way he had learned to cry during our months on the streets. No noise, no screams that might give us away. Just tears streaming down his face as I half-carried. I half-dragged him through the wilderness. The fog that had seemed so ominous that morning became our ally. It swallowed us within seconds, reducing visibility to a few dozen feet. I could hear our pursuers spreading out behind us, calling to each other, but they couldn't see us. I remembered my grandmother's map, the old Ford truck, the hidden entrance to the mine. If I could find it, if we could get underground, they might pass right over us. We climbed higher, the terrain growing steeper and more treacherous. My lungs burned. My legs screamed. But I kept pushing, kept pulling Theo along, because stopping meant dying. And then a figure materialized from the fog directly ahead. I skidded to a halt, nearly falling on the slick rocks. Sheriff Bo Harlan stood blocking the trail, his shotgun resting casually against his shoulder like he had been waiting there for hours. He wasn't breathing hard, wasn't sweating. He looked as comfortable in these woods as a wolf in its den. "Well now, Miss Kavanaugh," he drawled, spitting a stream of tobacco juice onto the dead leaves. "That was quite a show back there, running through the woods like a scared rabbit. Can't say I'm surprised, though. Your grandmother used to pull stunts like this, too." I pushed Theo behind me, positioning myself between my son and the man with the gun. "Get out of my way," I said. My voice was steady, but my heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Harlan chuckled, a low, mean sound. "See, that's not how this works, sweetheart. You've seen things you shouldn't have seen. Mr. Thornwood is a reasonable man. He's willing to make you a generous offer for the property and forget this whole misunderstanding. All you have to do is be smart." "And if I'm not smart?" The sheriff's smile vanished, replaced by something cold and reptilian. His eyes went flat and dead, like a shark's. "Then accidents happen," he said softly. "People fall down ravines up here all the time, especially city folks who don't know the mountain. Terrible tragedy, especially when there's a child involved. But these things happen." He shifted his grip on the shotgun, pointing it casually in our direction. "Tucker's boys are about 5 minutes behind me. Once they get here, options start disappearing real fast. So I suggest you think very carefully about your next move." I thought about my grandmother. At 35 years of fighting these men, 35 years of standing alone against power and corruption and violence, she had sacrificed everything to protect me. I wasn't going to let her sacrifice be in vain. "Let me ask you something, Sheriff," I said, my hand moving slowly toward my waistband. "Did you know that my grandmother kept a journal? 35 years of entries. Names, dates, details. Every threat, every bribe, Every piece of evidence she gathered about you and Thornwood and Titan Resources. Something flickered in Harlan's eyes. Uncertainty. Fear. She's dead, he said. Whatever crazy things she wrote, they died with her. Did they? I pulled the Colt from my waistband and leveled it at his chest. Because I have that journal now, and I have photographs of Thornwood at an illegal drilling operation on my property. And I have a satellite phone in my pack that can reach the FBI field office in Charleston with the touch of a button. I wasn't bluffing about the journal or the photos. The satellite phone was a lie, but he didn't know that. You're going to put down that shotgun, I continued, my voice hard as iron. You're going to step aside, and you're going to let me and my son walk out of here, or I'm going to shoot you dead and take my chances with Tucker. Harlan stared at me for a long moment. I could see him calculating, weighing his options, trying to decide if I was bluffing. Then he made his choice. He took a step forward. I squeezed the trigger. The gun roared. The recoil kicked my arms up, but I had been ready for it. The bullet slammed into the trunk of an oak tree 3 inches from Harlan's right ear, sending a shower of splinters into his face. He screamed, stumbling backward, dropping the shotgun as he clawed at his cheek. Blood dripped between his fingers. The next one goes through your knee, I shouted, already moving, grabbing Theo's hand and pulling him past the howling sheriff. Stay down if you want to keep walking. We ran. I didn't look back. The map burned in my memory. 300 yards up the ridge. A cluster of massive boulders. An old Ford truck that shouldn't have been there. And then I saw it. The truck was barely recognizable as a vehicle anymore. It was a rusted skeleton from the 1960s, half buried in dead leaves and vines. Yet the chassis was collapsed. The windows long since shattered. But it wasn't abandoned randomly. It was positioned deliberately, its massive grille wedged flush against a rock face, anchored to 2 ancient oaks by thick steel cables hidden under the undergrowth. Under here, I gasped, dropping to my knees. Theo, we have to go under the truck. I crawled beneath the rusted frame, pulling Theo after me. The ground beneath the truck bed wasn't solid. It was a hole, a shaft, or a dark opening descending into the mountain itself. A crude wooden ladder was bolted to the rock, the rungs worn smooth by years of use. Climb down, I told Theo, my voice calm despite the terror coursing through my veins. Don't look down, just look at me. From somewhere behind us I heard shouting. Tucker's voice. They had found Harlan. They knew where we were going. I lowered Theo onto the ladder and followed, pulling a piece of rusted metal across the opening above us. It wouldn't hide the entrance for long, but it might buy us a few minutes. 20 feet down, 30, 40. My feet hit solid ground. I clicked on my flashlight, and I understood everything my grandmother had spent 35 years protecting. The tunnel stretched out before us, reinforced with massive timber supports that had stood for decades. The air was cold and damp, carrying the mineral smell of deep earth, but it was fresh enough to breathe. This wasn't a cave or a natural formation. Yes, this was a mine shaft, carefully constructed, deliberately hidden. My grandmother hadn't just discovered a lithium deposit. She had built an entire underground fortress to protect it. The main tunnel was about 8 feet wide and 7 feet tall, carved through solid rock. Along the left wall, heavy metal shelving units held hundreds of military-grade MRE packets, water jugs, batteries, and medical supplies. A ham radio setup sat in one corner, wired to a bank of car batteries. There were sleeping bags, blankets, camping gear, tools of every kind. And there, mounted on a shelf beside the radio equipment, was something that made my heart leap. A satellite phone, heavy and military-grade, with a laminated card taped to its side listing emergency numbers. The West Virginia State Bureau of Investigation, the FBI field office in Charleston, the State Environmental Protection Agency. My grandmother hadn't just prepared a fortress. She had prepared a lifeline. I grabbed the phone and stuffed it in my pack, then continued exploring with the flashlight. About 50 feet down the tunnel, the passage opened into a larger cavern. The walls here literally sparkled in the beam, thick veins of silver-white mineral cutting through the dark granite like frozen lightning. Lithium. Millions and millions of dollars worth, completely untouched, waiting in the dark. But what caught my attention wasn't the mineral deposit. It was the wall of photographs and documents that covered one entire side of the cavern. My grandmother had turned this place into a command center. There were newspaper clippings about Thornwood's business dealings going back to the 1980s, property records showing the shell companies he had used to buy up land around the county, financial statements, canceled checks, a detailed timeline of every threat, every bribe, or every suspicious death that had occurred in Briar Hollow over the past 3 decades. And in the center of it all was a corkboard with photographs connected by red string, like something out of a detective movie. Thornwood, Harlan, the CEO of Titan Resources, a state senator, a federal judge. My grandmother had been building a case, not for court, for something else, something she had been waiting her entire life to deploy. Me, Theo tugged at my sleeve. Mommy, I smell something bad. I sniffed the air. He was right. There was something new in the atmosphere, something sharp and chemical, diesel fuel. I looked up at the shaft we had descended. Dark liquid was dripping down the ladder, pooling at the bottom. They weren't going to let us escape. They were going to burn us alive and collapse the tunnel, burying the evidence forever. Theo, I said, keeping my voice calm, we need to move, right now. I grabbed his hand and ran deeper into the mine, and my flashlight bouncing off the walls. My grandmother's journal had mentioned a ventilation shaft, an emergency exit. If I could find it before the flames reached us. Behind us, I heard a heavy metallic thud, someone climbing down the ladder. I swept my light across the floor and saw a thin fishing line stretched ankle-high across the tunnel. A trap. My grandmother had booby-trapped her own mine. I grabbed Theo and jumped over the line, and I'm pressing us both flat against the wall just as a massive figure came around the corner. Tucker, the enforcer. He was moving fast, a hunting rifle in his hands, his eyes fixed on the flashlight beam I had deliberately pointed toward the far end of the tunnel. He didn't see the fishing line. His boot caught the wire, and the world exploded into chaos. A massive bundle of rusted iron gears and drill bits, suspended from the ceiling by a pulley system, came crashing down. Tucker screamed as hundreds of pounds of metal slammed into his shoulder, driving him to the ground, pinning him beneath a twisted mass of scrap. His rifle clattered away into the darkness. I stepped out of the shadows, the Colt leveled at his head. Please, Tucker gasped, his face gray with shock. My arm's broken. I need help. You were going to shoot us, I said, my voice cold. You were going to murder a woman and a 6-year-old boy. I was just following orders. Whose orders? Thornwood's? He nodded, teeth clenched against the pane. I knelt beside him, keeping the gun trained on his chest, and patted down his jacket. My fingers found a hard plastic rectangle in his inside pocket. A satellite phone. I took it and stood. Here's what's going to happen, I said. You're going to lie here and think about your life choices, and I'm going to make a phone call. I powered on the phone. It took agonizing seconds to acquire a signal, even this deep underground. But finally, the screen lit up with a single bar of connectivity. I dialed the number on the card from my grandmother's phone. The West Virginia State Bureau of Investigation. SBI Emergency Dispatch. State your emergency. My name is Rosalind Kavanaugh, I said, my voice rapid but clear. I'm at the Ashford property on Ridge Road outside Briar Hollow. The local sheriff and an attorney named Victor Thornwood are attempting to murder me and my son to cover up an illegal mining operation. I have an armed man pinned in an underground tunnel, and there's a fire burning at the main entrance. Local law enforcement is compromised. Send state troopers immediately. There was a moment of shocked silence on the other end. Ma'am, keep this line open. State police units are being mobilized. ETA is 30 minutes. 30 minutes, an eternity. Behind me, I could hear the crackle of flames. The diesel fire was spreading, and the only way out was forward. Theo, stay close to me. We ran deeper into the tunnel, the smoke beginning to curl after us. My grandmother's map had shown a ventilation shaft near the back of the main cavern, an emergency exit to a creek bed on the north side of the mountain. The tunnel narrowed, forcing us to duck. Then it narrowed further, becoming a natural fissure in the rock barely wide enough for an adult. Cold air flowed through it, fresh and clean. In here, I gasped, pushing Theo ahead of me. Crawl, don't stop. Just keep crawling. The passage was a nightmare. Sharp rocks tore at our clothes and skin. The space grew so tight I could barely squeeze through. Behind us, the orange glow of flames illuminated the main cavern. The heat was building. We crawled for what felt like hours but was probably only 15 minutes. The tunnel angled upward, the air growing colder. And then suddenly we burst out into open air. We were on the mountainside, in a shallow creek bed that wound between snow-dusted rocks. And stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. The air was clean and cold and tasted like freedom. From below and behind us, I could see the orange glow of fire where the main entrance had been. Black smoke rose against the twilight, but overriding everything was the beautiful sound of sirens. Through the trees, I could see the flashing lights of police cruisers swarming up Miller's Road. Not Sheriff Harlan's cruisers, state police, state troopers. I pulled Theo into my arms and held him tight, both of us shaking with cold and terror and relief. Help was coming. We had survived. The next few hours exist in my memory as a kaleidoscope of chaos, fragments of noise and movement, and people asking questions I wasn't prepared to answer. What I remember clearly is Deputy Alma Reyes. She was the first friendly face I saw when we stumbled out of the creek bed onto the road. A young woman with dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and eyes that missed nothing. She was a county deputy, not one of Harlan's people, and she had answered the state police call for local assistance. She wrapped Theo in a thermal blanket from her cruiser and called for medical assistance. Then she turned to me, her expression a mixture of professional concern and barely concealed anger. "Ms. Kavanaugh, I'm Deputy Reyes. Can you tell me what happened up there?" I told her everything. In the inheritance, the journal, the illegal mining operation, Thornwood's threats, Sheriff Harlan's attempt to kill us, the tunnel, the fire, the escape. Reyes listened without interruption, her face growing grimmer with every word. "Sheriff Harlan is technically my boss," she said quietly when I finished, "but he's never been my friend. I've suspected for years that something was wrong in this department." You just gave me the confirmation I've been looking for." She pulled out her phone and made a call to the state capitol. Within an hour, the mountain was swarming with state troopers and federal agents. They found Tucker Brandt pinned under the iron trap in the mine, alive but badly injured, screaming for a lawyer. They found evidence of the illegal drilling operation, core samples and equipment bearing the Titan Resources logo. They found Sheriff Bo Harlan trying to flee the county in his personal vehicle, his face bloody and his story full of holes. And they found Victor Thornwood. He had tried to run when the sirens started, loaded up a convoy of company trucks with equipment and evidence, and headed for the back roads out of the county. But the state police had set up roadblocks on every exit within 50 miles. They pulled him out of a black SUV at 2 in the morning, still wearing his expensive overcoat, still carrying the sample of lithium ore he had pulled from my grandmother's mountain. I watched from the back of an ambulance as they put him in handcuffs. His face was pale with shock. This wasn't supposed to happen. He was Victor Thornwood. He had connections in Charleston, in Washington. He had spent 35 years building an empire of corruption, and it had all come crashing down in a single night. He looked at me as they led him to the patrol car, and I saw something I had never expected to see in his eyes. Fear. I gave my statement to a state investigator named Captain Rodriguez, a no-nonsense woman in her 50s, who seemed genuinely shocked by the scope of corruption she was uncovering. I showed her my grandmother's journal, the maps, the photographs, the 35 years of documentation that Loretta Mae Ashford had accumulated, while the world dismissed her as a crazy old hermit. Your grandmother was building a case," Rodriguez said, paging through the journal with something like awe. "A case that could take down some of the most powerful people in this county. She just never had anyone she could trust with it." "She had me," I said. "She was waiting for me." Rodriguez looked at me for a long moment, and something shifted in her expression. Understanding, maybe even respect. She chose well. The next weeks were a different kind of battle. He fought not with guns and running, but with lawyers and paperwork and endless depositions. Thornwood and Harlan were indicted on federal charges including illegal mining, attempted murder, racketeering, and conspiracy. Tucker Brandt turned the state's evidence within 48 hours of his arrest, providing names and dates and details that brought down half a dozen other corrupt officials across the region. But the legal process was slow, and there were moments when I thought I might lose everything anyway. Thornwood hired expensive lawyers from Charleston who tried to paint me as an unstable drifter who had attacked the sheriff without provocation. They produced witnesses, people I had never met, who claimed my grandmother really had been mentally ill, that her journal was fabricated, that I had manufactured the whole story to steal property I had no right to. For a while it looked like they might succeed. Voila, then something happened that I never expected. The community of Briar Hollow rose up. It started with Delphine Greer. 3 days after the arrest, she showed up at the small apartment the state had provided for me with a clipboard in one hand and a casserole in the other. "We're not letting them win," she said. "Not this time. Not ever again." She had been going door to door, farm to farm, collecting signatures. 47 people in a county where everyone knew everyone, where speaking against the sheriff had meant risking your livelihood, your safety, maybe your life. 47 people who remembered my grandmother's kindness, who had received her quiet help during hard times, who had watched Thornwood and Harlan terrorize her for decades and been too afraid to speak up. Not anymore. Emmett Crowley drove 3 hours to the state capitol to deliver the petition personally. He stood in front of a room full of investigators in his worn overalls and work boots, his voice steady and clear. "Loretta Mae Ashford helped every family on this mountain at one time or another," he said. "When my wife was dying, she sat with her every day. When Bill Greer passed, she paid off Delphine's mortgage. When the Johnson farm burned down, she organized the whole town to rebuild it. She never asked for credit, never asked for thanks. She just did what was right." He paused, his weathered face hardening. And Victor Thornwood spent 35 years trying to destroy her, trying to steal what belonged to her family for generations. I was too scared to speak up while she was alive. I'm not scared anymore. The evidence mounted. Old Mrs. Patterson from the feed store testified about the threats Thornwood had made against her husband in 1992. A retired mail carrier named Henry, who walked with a cane and spoke barely above a whisper, it confirmed that Sheriff Harlan's father had ordered him to intercept any correspondence between my grandmother and her family in Portland. "I kept copies," Henry said, his voice shaking. "Every letter that poor woman tried to send to her daughter and granddaughter. Every one that came back undelivered. I hid them in my attic for 24 years. I was too scared to do anything with them while Earl Harlan was alive. But he's dead now, and his son is going to prison. And I'm done being afraid." He handed over a box containing 214 letters. 214 letters my grandmother had written to me over 24 years. Every birthday, every Christmas, every Easter. Letters full of love and hope and longing. Letters that had been stolen before they could ever reach me. I read them all in a single night, sobbing so hard I couldn't breathe, discovering a woman I had never known. A woman who had thought about me every single day, who had prayed for me every night, who had lived her entire life in hope that someday, somehow, I would find my way back to her. The turning point in the legal battle came 6 weeks after the arrests, when investigators finally cracked the safe hidden in my grandmother's underground cavern. The safe was exactly where her journal said it would be, concealed behind a false panel in the deepest part of the mine. Inside, protected by 4 inches of steel and 35 years of secrecy, were documents that changed everything. There was a geological survey from 1991, conducted by an independent firm out of Virginia, confirming the lithium deposit's existence and estimating its value at over $230 million. There were financial records showing Thornwood's connection to Titan Resources dating back to 1985, years before he had first approached my grandmother. Evidence of kickbacks, bribes, payoffs to local officials. And there were copies of complaints my grandmother had filed with federal authorities over the years, complaints that had been mysteriously lost or mishandled or simply ignored. And there was a video, an old camcorder tape in a plastic case, dated just 6 months before my grandmother's death. The label, written in her shaky handwriting, read simply, "For Rose, when the time is right." I watched it in the state's evidence room, with Captain Rodriguez and Deputy Reyes standing beside me. And the VCR was ancient, borrowed from the local library, and it took 3 tries to get the tape to play. When it finally did, I saw my grandmother's face for the first time in 24 years. She looked exactly like I remembered and nothing like I expected. Old and frail, her skin papery and thin, her hands trembling as she adjusted the camera. But her eyes were sharp, fierce, burning with an intensity that seemed to reach through the screen. "Rose," she said, and her voice cracked on my name. "When my beautiful Rose, if you're watching this, it means I'm gone, and it means you found your way back to me, just like I always prayed you would." She wiped tears from her cheeks with a handkerchief that looked older than me. "I know what you must think of me. Your mother told you I was crazy, that I drove you away, that I didn't love you." Her voice broke, and she pressed her hand to her chest as if trying to hold herself together. "It wasn't true, Rose, and none of it was true." She took a shaky breath and continued. "In 1987, I found lithium on our land, enough to be worth a fortune. I should have sold it, should have taken the money and lived comfortably. But I knew what those mining companies would do to this mountain. I'd seen what they did to other places. Strip the land bare, poison the water, take what they wanted, and leave devastation behind. So I refused to sell, and that's when the threats started." Her face hardened, the grief replaced by cold anger. Victor Thornwood murdered his own brother in 1992 to take control of the family business. Sheriff Harlan's father helped him cover it up. They threatened me for years, but I wouldn't break. So in 2000, they changed tactics. She looked directly into the camera, her eyes boring into mine. "They threatened you. You were 8 years old, walking home from school alone. Oh, they described exactly what they would do to you if I didn't cooperate." Her hands clenched into fists. "I couldn't let that happen. I couldn't risk your life. So I pushed your mother away, made her believe I was unstable, dangerous, someone she needed to protect you from. I let my own daughter hate me, let her die thinking I had abandoned her because it was the only way to keep you safe. I spent the next 24 years alone on this mountain, gathering evidence. I'm preparing for the day when you would be old enough, strong enough to finish what I started. I became the crazy hermit, the woman everyone avoided. I let them think I was harmless, senile, not worth the trouble of killing. But I was watching them the whole time, building a case, waiting." She smiled through her tears, and in that smile I saw triumph. "And now you're here, my brave, beautiful granddaughter, who survived things no child should have to survive, who protected her own son the way I tried to protect you." She reached toward the camera, as if she could touch me through the screen. "Everything I have belongs to you now. The land, the evidence, the truth. Use it to destroy them. Use it to build a life for yourself and your son. And know that I loved you, Rose. I loved you every single day, even when I couldn't show it, even when I couldn't tell you." She smiled one last time, the smile of a woman who had made peace with her choices. "What, you are so much stronger than you know. I've always seen it in you. Be strong now. Be brave. And never let anyone make you feel like you don't deserve to be loved." The screen went black. I sat in that evidence room and wept. For my grandmother. For my mother. For the little girl I had been, growing up believing she was unwanted. For all the years lost to fear and silence and the cruelty of powerful men. Deputy Reyes put a hand on my shoulder. Captain Rodriguez pretended to study her notes, giving me space to grieve. But beneath the grief, something else was growing. Something hard and bright and unbreakable. Purpose. My grandmother had spent 35 years fighting alone. She had given everything she had to protect me. Now it was my turn to finish what she had started, and I was going to win. The trial lasted 4 months, but in the end, justice prevailed. Victor Thornwood was convicted on 14 counts of federal racketeering, illegal mining, attempted murder, and conspiracy. The judge sentenced him to 30 years in federal prison. He would die behind bars. Sheriff Bo Harlan received 18 years. Tucker Brandt, in exchange for his testimony, got 7. Titan Resources, facing the prospect of a massive federal investigation into their operations across 6 states, settled out of court. They paid $18 million directly to me, along with an agreement to remediate all environmental damage their illegal operation had caused and to never again seek mineral rights in the region. The money was more than I had ever imagined having, more than I knew what to do with. But I remembered my grandmother's words from the journal. This land isn't about wealth, it's about legacy. I partnered with an environmentally responsible mining company. one with a proven track record of sustainable extraction and community investment. They leased the mineral rights for a percentage of profits, with ironclad protections for the land and water written into every paragraph of the contract. The first royalty check was for $2.5 million. I used some of it to pay off every debt I had accumulated during the darkest year of my life. I set up a trust fund for Theo that would ensure he never had to worry about his future. I donated $100,000 to the St. Francis Women's Shelter in Portland, with instructions that it be used specifically for emergency housing assistance. And I rebuilt my grandmother's house, not the way it had been, cluttered and falling apart and bearing the scars of 35 years of siege. I tore down the old structure and built something new on the same foundation. A beautiful timber frame home with large windows that looked out over the valley, solar panels on the roof, a modern kitchen with a 6-burner stove, a bedroom for Theo with dinosaur sheets and glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling, and a porch. A wide wraparound porch with rocking chairs and a swing where I could sit in the evenings and watch the sun set over the mountains my grandmother had loved. It's been 1 year now since I climbed off that Greyhound bus with $38 in my pocket and a sick child in my arms. This morning, I woke up in a house that belongs to me, on land that has been in my family for 4 generations. All through the window, I could see Theo playing in the yard with the dog we adopted last spring, a goofy golden retriever he named Biscuit. The apple trees my great-great-grandmother planted are blooming on the south slope. The creek my grandmother loved is running clear and cold down the mountain. I made coffee in my new kitchen, in a pot that was big enough for company, because today there would be company. Delphine arrived first, carrying a basket of fresh biscuits and her famous apple butter. She's 73 now, but she moves like a woman half her age, her silver hair pinned up in the same practical bun she's worn for 50 years. "Morning, Rose," she said, kissing my cheek. "Lord, that boy has grown a foot since Christmas." Emmett came next, parking his ancient truck beside the new barn we built together last fall. He doesn't say much, never has, but he showed up every weekend with his tools and his steady hands, teaching Theo how to hammer a nail and plane a board and respect the land that feeds you. By noon, the porch was full. Neighbors from up and down the hollow, people who had known my grandmother, people who had feared the sheriff, people who had found their voices again after decades of silence. They brought food and stories and laughter, filling the house with warmth. I slipped away for a moment, walking to the stone marker I had placed at the edge of the property. A simple granite slab under the apple trees, engraved with my grandmother's name and the dates of her birth and death. Beneath her name, I had added the words she wrote to me: "I have always loved you." I knelt in the grass and placed my hand on the warm stone. "We did it, Grandma," I whispered. "We won." The wind stirred the apple blossoms, sending petals drifting down around me like snow. "I understand now. Everything you did, everything you sacrificed. The letters you wrote that never reached me. The years you spent alone, fighting battles no one else could see. You were never crazy. You were never weak. You were the strongest person I've ever known." A tear slid down my cheek, but I was smiling. Theo is happy, he's healthy, he's safe. He loves this mountain as much as you did. Last week, he asked me to teach him how to tend the apple trees. He said he wants to make sure they're still here when he's old enough to have kids of his own. I stood, brushing the grass from my knees. I'm not alone anymore. I have friends. I have a home. I have a future. You gave me all of that. You gave me everything. From the porch, I heard Theo calling for me. Delphine had brought out her guitar, and everyone was singing old mountain songs. Theo wanted me to hear. I touched the gravestone one last time. "I love you, Grandma. I'll love you forever." Then I walked back to the house, to my son, to the life my grandmother had fought so hard to give me. I want to share one last thing with you. Last month, while cleaning out a storage closet in the new house, I found a small wooden box I had missed before. It had been hidden in a corner, covered by a tarp, forgotten in the chaos of construction. Inside was a locket, tarnished silver on a thin chain. I recognized it from the photograph. The one of my grandmother holding me as a baby. She had been wearing this locket in that picture. I opened it carefully, the tiny hinge protesting after decades of disuse. Inside were 2 photographs. On the left was my mother as a young woman, beautiful and laughing, looking into the camera with eyes full of joy. On the right was me as a toddler, the same photo that was in the box I'd found under the floorboards. And beneath the photographs, folded into a tiny square, was a note. For Rose, and it read, "When you find this, know that you were loved from the first moment of your life until the last moment of mine. We were separated by miles and years and the cruelty of evil men. But love is stronger than distance, stronger than time, stronger than death. You are home now. You are safe. You are loved. Be happy, my darling girl. Be happy." I wear the locket every day now. It rests against my heart, a constant reminder of the woman who gave up everything so that I could have this. A home, made a family, a future. My grandmother spent 35 years alone on this mountain, fighting a war that no one else could see. She was called crazy, dismissed as a hermit, abandoned by the system that should have protected her. But she never stopped fighting, never stopped loving, never stopped believing that someday her granddaughter would find her way home. I found my way home, and I will spend the rest of my life making sure her sacrifice was worth it. Thank you for staying with me through this entire journey. From the streets of Portland to this mountain in West Virginia, you've been with me through every twist and turn. If my story touched your heart in any way, I would be so grateful if you would subscribe to this channel. We share stories here about hope, about second chances, about finding your place in this world when you thought you had lost it forever. I want to hear from you now. Have you ever discovered that you were loved more than you realized? That someone was watching over you, protecting you, even when you didn't know it? Have you ever found home in a place you never expected? Share your story in the comments. You never know who might need to hear it. And remember what my grandmother taught me. You are stronger than you know. You are more loved than you can imagine. And no matter how lost you feel, there is always a way home. Until next time. The end.